So back to Embodied Love Lounge, and what has you on fire for today's episode? We had a conversation just a day ago, and you were like, I want to talk about this. So tell me a little bit about some background on that.
And first, I'm just really excited to be back in Greece and in this particular place with you talking. So that's very exciting. The topic we were talking about on this hike, what we realized is a friend of ours, a close friend, is going through some relationship struggles, some difficult ones, and decided to go the traditional route. Let's go see some couples therapy. Her partner agreed, which is all fantastic. And then she was sharing what happened in the therapeutic session. And within less than a minute, I said, stop, wait, what happened? And what had happened was the therapist brought in their own personal preferences and projections and fears into the session. Like, no, this is not serving me. This is not what a therapeutic scenario should be like. That's what a best friend does, not a therapist.
And it was actually, she even said, she's like, yeah, it sounded a little bit weird to me because this just is not the, like it. She's like, I felt that there should be more questions being asked, and all of a sudden you're giving me your advice. There's something intuitively in her that was like, this doesn't feel right.
Exactly. And I think that story just triggered in me, like, oh, I've heard this a million times over.
And I'm happy because she has a high level of personal integrity and relational maturity, because what the therapist was saying was actually agreeing with her and trying to go with her perspective. And she was like, no, that's not right. Whereas I think most people would have been like, oh yeah, see, I'm right. The therapist in my corner, partner's wrong. Let's go get them.
Yeah, exactly. So why is this important to you as a listener? Well, there's going to be a moment, if not already, that you have a challenge in your sex life, in your intimacy, in your relating. And honestly, what's available out to support you isn't very good. And I think that people can do a lot for themselves that's even better than, glancing through Vogue or Googling online or asking ChatGPT. I mean, that's pretty horrible. Or even going to some traditional help, because sometimes when you go to get that traditional help, it's actually not the thing that you need. So that's what this episode is about. I want to talk about how I developed my orientation to helping people.
I wanted to get into tell us, I mean, you do have a doctorate in psychology.
Yeah.
So get into a little bit of your background that allows you to critique therapy, but then also tell your personal story, where you started and why you chose ultimately not to become a licensed therapist.
Yes. So, my background immediately started, I grew up on a very violent First Nation reservation in Canada. And one of the big violence that happens every single day is gender-based violence. So there's women being beaten by their partners daily. This is just normal, kids as well, but a lot of women. So my mother,
raped.
Yeah. My mother, she has no therapeutic background. She's just a good-hearted person. She opened our home and it became a shelter for abused women. Not a formal one, but this is where women knew they could come and run away and be safe and be cared for. Inevitably, they would go back. But as a young girl, I saw the physical abuse, like the evidence of it on bodies. I remember this one woman, my mom had asked me if I could wash her back, and there was literally like an outline of a boot mark in her back. And that, as a little girl, was just like, I knew that wasn't love. So that's a little bit where I started becoming aware that there's things that are not nice that are happening in the world, but my parents had such a deep, loving, respectful relationship that I also had this really positive orientation to relating. And then fast forward to my teenage years, I don't know how this happened, but all my friends somehow would come to me and tell me all their stories about dating, about their boyfriends or their girlfriends or their sexual experiences. And I wasn't dating, I wasn't having any relationships, and I definitely wasn't being sexual at that time. I was with myself, yes, but they were the ones out having the adventure, yet they were coming to me to talk about it.
Well, if I remember correctly, when you told me these things, what you were hearing from their adventures actually made you said, I do not want to have a boyfriend.
Exactly.
I do not want to go into a relationship. I mean, you also said, too, that on that reservation, there were so many just teen pregnancies.
Teen pregnancies, a lot of teen deaths, actually.
Yeah.
So I had file folders on all my friends because I couldn't keep track. They were sometimes is it Mike? Is it Mark? Like, I don't know. It couldn't keep track.
So
of
it
all
wasn't just that there were so many friends, but there was so many boyfriends that they were going through.
And their different experiences. And I think that's where my training in really listening, they just needed to be heard, really listening. And then over time, I would start seeing patterns. And so then how I would ask the question, and how I would give reflection was formed by these 2, 3, 4 hour long conversations I was having. Of course, I wasn't charging anything. I was just with friends. Fast forward then to being 20 years old, having a violent rape experience, being told I was going to die from that, having 2 weeks to live, and coming out of that looking for resources and absolutely not finding anything, being shamed by the hospital staff, being like just alone. And so my way of dealing with that, I didn't want to just survive. This is what we're really good at in our societies, to help people get to a survival place. I wanted to thrive. There was no information on thriving. So my journey culminated in coming into a place where I really took care of myself and started to thrive. And that then attracted people, including a sex therapist, one of the top sex therapists in Vancouver at the time. She started to train with me and then said, "This is so incredible. I'm going to send you patients." And so I started to see, she was telling me the gap. She goes, "I cannot do what you do. So I need to send my patients to you." So I want to, that's my background, but really I learned so much in the understanding. And because I didn't have restricted frameworks, and first of all, I was just dealing with myself and then just sharing from a direct experience. Eventually, of course, I got qualified in different things in order to do this professionally.
Let's take a pause here, because that was a lot.
It's a lot.
So for all of you that are listening out there, we just covered some pretty heavy topics, some pretty strong visuals of boots and back and everything. And so take a little breath, because what I would like to do then is go into the part now of how did this then really birth your work and inspired you to provide another training and even decide not to become then a licensed psychologist?
Well, I realized the PhD for me was about getting credentialed and actually learning how to do research.
Yes.
It was less about being a licensed practitioner and more like, I don't understand research, and I also need credentials in order for my current life work to be valued and taken seriously. So I had no intention ever to work as a licensed therapist, purely because I saw the restrictions over and over again, but because those therapists were my clients.
Yes.
And they would talk to me about their frustrations with their field of work, which I know you know as well, because as you were doing your work, you were also meeting therapists, and they were actually having a lot of problems personally themselves, plus seeing it and yet not having solutions.
That's a whole other story. I had not just therapists, I had doctors, osteos, counselors, psychologists, physiotherapists, nurses. The list goes on of people who, of course, by working with humans, you are necessarily going to be dealing with sex. That's how we came into the world, and it is something that is at the core of our foundation of our identity of who we are.
Yes.
And so there's always seemed to be a difficulty, though, that people faced when their school books and their practices didn't really give them much guidance on this. And of course, they're having clients that are coming up with these issues, and they feel very limited with the angle by which they can then approach it. So maybe you could speak a little bit then about the angle of like what is a good thing for a therapist to be able to do, and where's that kind of like limitation? We'll go into the mistakes later that they make.
Sure.
And then I'd like to hear you speak about why you created your education.
Yeah, for me, it's less about the mistakes. It's like about the appropriateness of, you don't put a Band-Aid on a gaping wound that needs stitches. So kind of identifying like, what is it that we need and where do we go is more what I really want to discuss. There is an appropriate place for therapy.
I'll be happy to talk about the parts they mess up then.
Okay. The appropriate place for therapy, though, is when we get to talk about what's going on. This is a sense-making activity. And often when we are challenged, when we're having difficulties, when something's just hurting a lot, we're spiraling. and we spiral in our thoughts. And the only way to get out of that spiral is either to journal, because we literally can only write one word at a time. And that forces our mind to sense make. Or when we speak, we can't speak 10 words at once. They have to be consecutive.
Yes.
So that forces sense making. And with the right kind of therapeutic setting where you feel seen, where you feel respected, where you feel there's no judgment, and there's just a question that allows you to explore how you're feeling about it, what you think about it, that is actually a really excellent tool in the journey of discovery. It's not the only tool, and it's meant to be used at a certain time. What I found was missing for me and for all of my clients was embodiment. I was hearing all these theories about sex, about relationship, about pleasure. I was hearing ideological fantasies of like the spiritual union and the perfect, masculine feminine dynamic, and because there was a lot of David Data stuff at that time, and there was a lot of Osho and Tantra stuff at that time, and a lot of Mantak Chia. There was all these things going on, so people had there's really strong ideas and ideals, and I could see people trying to fit into those, but what I was also seeing is it was not working in real time. And I was like, well, what can help us? What's real? What's real is right here, this body. I can squeeze it. I can feel it. I can choose to take a deep breath or a shallow breath. I can choose to open or close. So that's real. And so I started working with myself first, with my body, just with my breath, making sounds, opening the fascia, being with myself. That's a form of intimacy. And that experience of solo care, where I could reliably feel confident and trust myself, is a huge step that we miss in the healing journey when things are very difficult.
Well, this sort of goes back to the first part of the podcast where you were speaking about listening to all your friends and they were having relationships and you weren't. Mm-hmm. And so someone could say, is like, well, how are you able to advise them, especially on matters of sexuality, when it's a partnered thing? And but you then specifically said, but I was, in a sense, birth lifelong relationship with myself sexually.
Yes.
And this gets onto a piece that we'll really go into in the second part of the podcast of how it is that you can be a sovereign creature. Because I think this is so important when, in fact, I know it's so important when you're going to a doctor, to a gynecologist, a pelvic floor specialist, a therapist, any educator, that you have a reference off of what is your actual truth. And that truth, again, isn't just this subjective, like, oh, well, I believe or identify. No, I'm talking about your actual relationship to what your body has and where the commonalities are and where the particularities are of that body.
That direct relationship, but it's very honest.
Yes, exactly. So with that in mind, you then have a program that's called EPSP. So first of all, I want you to say the acronym, what it stands for, because I think that last letter is so important.
Okay. So the program is Embodied Psychosexual Method. The certification is Embodied Psychosexual Practitioner.
Yes.
And I chose that word very particularly because I'm not training people to be therapists. A lot of therapists come and get my training. I'm not training people to be medical doctors. Doctors come and get my training. I'm not training people to whatever the modality is, but a practitioner is very important to me. That means I am walking my talk. I practice what I preach. And then I share from this very embodied knowing, like, oh, I actually know what it's like to have to go through something, to settle myself, to actually open myself intentionally. And what that creates is gourmet. It's an incredible thing when someone recognizes I am a sexually sovereign person, and here are my capacities within the freedom of being that and the responsibility of being that.
That word practitioner is so essential, especially in the age of influencers and people that, have ChatGPT and all these things. It's because when you truly embody whatever your craft is, you then also become a practitioner. Now, being just a practitioner doesn't necessarily mean you can transfer that knowledge to somebody else.
Yeah.
However, I feel that that is a really big missing component, especially in this industry. And you have a story that you've told me before about ASEC.
Oh, yes.
And I would love for you to tell it, because this is the American Association of
Counselors.
ASECT. So it's like social workers, educators, counselors, and therapists, I think, something like that. American Associated Society. Anyways, ASECT is for educators, counselors, and therapists. All I hear is asexual, but get into your story.
It's a legitimate
It is.
platform. It's highly recognized. So yes, I had the privilege and honor to speak there twice at their conferences, both with Dr. Wickman. It was a mutual talk that we would give. And in this particular talk, it was a second talk that I did there in 2018, I believe.
American Association of Sexual Educators, Counselors, and Therapists.
There you go.
There we go.
Perfect. And in that time, there was a lot going on with identity politics, and every single talk was being destroyed. Like every speaker was like crying, like just being destroyed. So I was aware a little bit of that, but I wasn't aware too much. Don't care about that so much. I care about my topic. And so in that room, we had standing room only. I mean, it was so full. There were a ton of people outside. I went outside. I met every single person. I said, I do not know why they're not upgrading the size of this room. I deeply apologize if there's anything I can do to support. So I was very inclusive in wanting everyone in there. But the people that were outside were feeling like, because there was a lot of politics going on, that it was against them personally. So that was kind of weird. So I was already a charged environment.
Yeah.
I start the talk with Dr. Wickman. It's about menopause. So this is very particular to a group of people born with ovaries, period. You don't have menopause if you're not born with ovaries. It just doesn't, it's just, it's not in this, like you'll never have menopause.
Yeah, it's called andropause.
Yes, you have something else. So we got interrupted briefly. Hey, you need to be more inclusive. I'm like, thank you so much. I'll take that into consideration. And it kind of put me in a spunky mood. Like, all right, you're challenging me. I'm going to challenge you. So to the room, I said, okay, here's something very important. All of you here are coaching or helping or holding space for people around sexuality, correct? All the hands went up. Great. All of you genuinely are sex positive and advise that people self-pleasure or at least explore orgasm. Is that correct? All the hands went up. Perfect. All right. How many of you had an orgasm today? No hands went up. Well, my hand went up because I'd already had several that morning on my own. And I was like, okay, don't worry. It's early. I get it. We're at a conference.
I'll give you a pass.
Give you a pass for today. But how about the last week? No hands, which surprised me. I thought at least a few hands would go up then in the last week.
You're like, I'm still going to be able to make my point, but not this strongly.
I'm like, oh, okay. How about the last month? And I kid you not, maybe 2 or 3 hands went up out of a huge room of at least 100 people. I said, standing room only. And I was shocked. And I said, this is the problem that we are facing in this industry, is we are advising something we ourselves are not doing. Therefore, our limbic resonance is dissonant, and therefore the client cannot actually succeed because it's so crucial that, for example, if you were to come to me and I advise you on nutrition, and I say, you must eat your greens, you must eat clean, but you catch me at my house. And what's happening at my house is that you see me eating a bag of potato chips or something.
Yep.
And then you're like, what the heck is this? Now, all my advice is gone. You're like, well, if she's eating potato chips, I can eat potato chips. She's the one advising me to be healthy. So there's a discordance there. So huge point that I firmly believe that people who are working in this field especially need to be walking their talk. And that's what EPSP stands for. It's practitioners who, they go through a rigorous training. It's almost like a master's level training Yes, it's a 1 year program, but it's more like a 4 year program because people repeat it over and over again. And they have to confront and face and look at, wow, I'm actually only as effective as the level of embodiment that I have.
And when you say 1 year program, it's yes, you can complete it in a year, but then I see the amount of time that you spend with every single one, no matter if it's 10 years later, that they are still coming each year and doing coaching and keeping things on board. And the thing I also notice too is that they go, wow, that hit on a whole new level, or that I've never heard you say before. You're like, I've been saying that since the beginning. And so some of this is such an important retraining that doesn't happen just on a book smart level. Now, you also said a word before, sense making, and that has a really particular meaning for myself, coming from the cognitive sciences, that when I look at an inactive approach to studying interaction, setting up experiments, giving coaching, that sense making is a very important part. And normally we think of sense making, we think of like the logical aspects of sense making. It's like, oh, okay, well, logically, if this, then that, where it even gets more basic. Sense making is such things that you learn in your body. It's like, oh, depression is down, feeling good is up, that, confidence, shoulders back, or bigger is better, or like, and so and it comes from like just simple things like, how do we, from an embodied place, make sense of the world, that we learn to stack blocks on top of each other. And so, okay, well, it doesn't fall over, so stability is good, standing is good. And so we develop all these perspectives that really shape who we are. And what you do in your training, and why I see at least that they come back and keep on coming back, is because it's like going to the karate dojo.
Yes.
You are continually doing a practice that brings you deeper and deeper into your embodiment. And sure, you can go and get your black belt and however long that takes you, but then that doesn't mean you just suddenly stop. If anything, that is now the launching pad for you to really bring that in to yourself, start to really figure out, how does this now fit into my own field? And then they'll continue to come back to you for reference points on that, and to continue to up level. And I think that's something that's really unique about your program. And so when I hear it's a 1 year program, I'm like, really though? Like,
It's lifelong.
Precisely.
One of the distinguishing factors of this methodology is that it's not prescriptive. And this is what actually the high-level practitioners who are coming for this certification, they are so grateful, because they're coming from a modality that is prescriptive. It has restriction, it has limitations. So why EPSM is so effective is that it's emergent. You have to attend to what's right in front of you.
Yes.
And through that deep listening, and through really being with the person, not just listening to their words, watching their posture, how are they moving, how are they speaking, what's happening in their body, how are they describing the experience. And then, so if someone were to come, someone asked me the other day, what's your prescription for shame with a client? I'm like, there isn't one. Shame affects us all very differently. Now, bringing it to the light, yes, that's the first step, being able to talk about it. But each individual will have a different dance with that experience. And so there's a bunch of foundational premises that we can stand on, but there has to be flexibility within how do we deliver support to this human being. And less is always more, and allowing the person to have a direct, embodied, somatic, interoceptive experience of themselves builds that confidence where they can then confront things on their own and not always need the practitioner, which is super important, because what we're attempting to do, we're all sexually sovereign. You're born that way, but we don't behave that way. And so this modality is reminding you, you are powerful, you are sourcing things, you have your own intelligence. In fact, maybe in the second half, we can talk about the 5 stages of erotic evolution, what actually happens in those stages, what to look out for. Who are we on this erotic individuation process? What the heck is that? And why that therapeutically, it's so vital that any practitioner from any modality understands the inherent beauty, but also sensitivity of this individuation process and how even with the best intentions you can interfere with it and then what to do. So as an individual listening to this, feel excited that you were just already born sexually sovereign. Feel excited that wherever you are in your phase of erotic evolution, it's right where you need to be. And that's a gorgeous thing. So beautiful. And feel excited that you have this, your own emergent erotic intelligence that's coming forward with its own timing, its own expression, its own definitions, its own experience. And that has worth and should not be shaped by the constructs and ideals and presuppositions of others. It really does need the freedom to be nourished, to be expressed in its own unique individuality. So those are the things I wanted to say in this public half of the
Well, before we
episode.
jump over to the other part, I'm always here for this part. I want to always get a little bit more in there for the listeners, because you dropped some big terms, and predominantly this term sexual sovereignty. Now, in the next part of the episode, we're going to talk about, even I want to hear more about EPSP and this practitioner and your method, and how the EPSM is actually beyond trauma informed, because that's a term that just gets thrown out there a lot, but we're going to save that for later. Also, I want to talk about, where does therapy go off and how to recognize it, what to do about it, how to even choose a good therapist versus a good coach versus how to read academic papers, these type of things.
Correct. And how many therapists come and get this certification so they can do a more holistic job.
So before we do that, before we jump over to that side, I just briefly want you to say, well, you mentioned this word sovereignty.
Yes.
What does that mean? And what does it mean in terms of sex?
Okay. Sovereignty is a big word, and we're used to collectively thinking about it in two ways. A king or a queen, the sovereign of a land, or a sovereign country. It has its borders, it's self-sufficient, it's taking care of itself. So it has an autonomy. It has capacity to make choices separate from everything else. And it has the capacity to create whatever it wants to create because it's at that highest level of authority, let's say. We all have that as individuals. I really want to bring into the collective that is not a special term for just one or two people born into a particular lineage, that every human being is gifted a body, and this is our sovereign space. When it comes to sexuality, you asked?
Yeah.
Yes. So it's
What
our
is sexual sovereignty then?
sexual sovereignty is our inborn right to make choices about this body, what happens with this body, who this body wants to interact with, how this body wants to express itself, like whether I choose to, if I'm a menstruating person, if I choose to use tampons or pads, that's my decision. So there's a lot of sovereign choices that I get to make, the person that's sovereign gets to make about my fertility, about my pleasure, about my genitals, about who I want to be in love with, etc., etc. And with that isn't just the freedom to make those choices. Being sexually sovereign also requires that we are responsible. We have the ability to respond, and we use our voice. We have clear boundaries. We direct things in hopefully a way that allows us to thrive and the people around us to thrive. And it allows us also to have a degree of maturity, meaning I might feel turned on right now, but I'm not making a choice to engage. It's not appropriate, but I'm also not going to shut myself down. I enjoy feeling enlivened. It's just not appropriate for me to act on it. That is one of the gifts of being sexually sovereign, is to recognize, hey, I have the freedom to feel switched on, and I have the freedom to choose whether or not I engage with it, and the responsibility to make a wise choice.
Well, we also, this brings me to then the last part of this, is that there is a great sort of internal question, reflection of a person who's worked with us, and they have been on their own journey. And at one point they asked, in this reflection, this journaling piece was, well, I wonder, what is the difference between sovereignty and sexual sovereignty? And my feeling is that there isn't a difference.
No.
In fact, the sexual part of sovereignty is essential to truly being sovereign.
Yeah.
And the only reason we have to say sexual sovereignty is because people don't consider that piece.
Correct.
Similar to hearing that someone is musically intelligent or artistically intelligent versus just intelligent. It's because we've made this box that intelligence is like logic and math.
Yeah.
And realizing, well, actually logic and math has a huge part to do with music.
There's also kinesthetic intelligence.
There's a whole level of all these different types of intelligence, but really if you just say intelligence should include that, but because of culture, we don't think about that. So we have to add on another little descriptor to then make us understand that. And so it's the same thing. And I really emphasize that, you know, if there's a piece that we could leave with you today and a piece that we could leave with the world in our mission is that one day when we say sovereign, it means and is understood that sexual sovereign is actually right at the epicenter of sovereignty.
And it's extremely important. I mean, I brought this topic to the United Nations a long time ago. I don't remember, 15 years ago, something like this. And they said, oh, yes, it's an important thing, but it's going to take a long time. Then I brought this to a United States senator. I was like, this is really important. They're like, well, it's going to take a long time to have the laws in place.
And that to me is BS. That's like saying it's going to take a long time to have like good to talk about, like to promote that people should have good nutrition.
Yeah. But for me, what I understood then, I was like, I'm not going to wait for the United Nations.
Yes.
I'm not going to wait for senators. I'm not going to wait for lawmakers. This change is going to happen with you. It's going to happen with every individual who starts to recognize, this is me. I have this sovereign body. I'm going to start taking care of it differently, listening to it differently, and being in the world differently.
Because the child, you're born with it.
You're born with it.
And it's not until it's sort of trained out of you and then you get shamed or whatever it might be, that then you start to give up that power.
And it's super, super important for those of us who live in a way where we can advocate for ourselves, that we do, because there are literally multi-millions of people right now in slavery. They don't have sovereign choice over what happens to their body. So collectively, we have a responsibility for those of us who are free to make choice, to make those choices, just so that eventually it becomes such a commonplace understanding that the laws have to change to accommodate, and the United Nations has to start recognizing it. Like, these things will happen because collectively we're like, hey, I have the right to good air and I have the right to water, and we have these rights, but we don't talk about the body, and the body is, that's where we are.
So whether if it's given away or taken away, you always have it. Mm-hmm. It's always there, and this is why I'm so glad that you have brought this training to the professional world, because this important part of sex and sexuality and just life force is not within the education that most are trained to give.
Yes.
Well, let's jump over to the other side.
To join us for the complete and explicit version of this podcast, just simply upgrade your membership and you'll get instant access.